We're going through something absolutely historic.
Technologies across the board are growing exponentially.
It's a disruption that's going to completely redefine the way businesses compete.
In the next decade, we're going to lose 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies.
The exponential growth of computing is continuing.
AI is nowhere near its full potential.
Whether you like it or not, that the future cannot be stopped by anyone.
So welcome back to another episode of the Future Tech and Foresight podcast. As always, this is Mark Verbenkov. So I wanted to follow up on something that I mentioned a couple episodes back, and that's essentially that I have now moved back to Canada after many, many years abroad to set up a strategic foresight business over here. So how it came about was after some, I think, pretty interesting discussions about technology and the future. It actually became pretty apparent to me that there was an opportunity to help out local businesses, kind of get ready for the future. And I've been supporting some few initial clients over the last couple of months, and of course am taking on more as time goes on. So for those of you that are curious, what I am basically doing is using the knowledge that I've accumulated here from this podcast, as well as the previous work that I've done, and more than a decade of diving into technological impacts to support organizations that I think are really good at what they do, but not necessarily aware of what's around the corner and how technologies and many of the trends that I talk about on the podcast could directly disrupt their organization. So I also support them to leverage these transformations and identify new opportunities like products, services, or internal processes to get ahead of any competitors that they might have in the market. I'm also actively preparing strategies and roadmaps for how to avoid the future risks that I outline, as well as help to create kind of preferred scenarios that these organizations can maneuver towards. So I've been finding it to be absolutely fascinating, and I think also really fits well with the podcast because of a lot of the ideas that are either researched beforehand or discussed on the podcast can actually fit directly into a lot of the client work that I do. Okay, so with this in mind, let's move on to today's topic. So something pretty interesting became apparent to me while working on a presentation that I gave this past week to a client on the current AI arms race that we're all, or hopefully everybody that's listening to the podcast is paying attention to, and how businesses may leverage generative AI specifically in the years to come. So as I was going deeper down the AI rabbit hole and getting, I would say, pretty familiar with the new AI tools available, it started to become more and more apparent that it's actually realistic to start thinking about building an autonomous business today, whether that be knowledge or otherwise. Although I still think, product and maybe businesses that focus on physical goods might be a little bit more challenging, but let's put that to the side. So I first came across this term of the autonomous business about 2 years ago when I interviewed, I still think to this day, one of my favorite guests, the futurist Matthew Griffin of the 311 Institute, where we focused on the future of work and how a range of trends and technologies are changing the tasks within work in most organizations, but also how it was actually more than likely that full autonomous businesses could actually be set up in the future. And he was specifically focusing not just on a 10-year time horizon that most futurists do, but he looks out a little bit further to a 50-year time horizon. So the way that these autonomous businesses would actually function would be through the digital tools and the AI systems that would actually run the organization without any human involvement after the initial setup. So I actually did an episode on this about a year ago or so, and the only example that I was actually able to find of this were a few trading bots that were automatically trading stocks with no human involvement, of course, after that they were initially set up. So the assumption here was that this reality was actually still many years away, and that technology, and of course AI specifically, needed to advance by at least a few steps before something like this would actually be possible, especially, as I mentioned before, when dealing with physical products and various services like that. And even knowledge-based services might still be a challenge. But then the advent of ChatGPT and the current AI arms race happened, and I thought that maybe there should be a re-evaluation of what is possible today. So this was made especially clear for me when I was preparing for the client presentation and was looking through the dozens of new AI tools that promised everything from delivering advanced customer service chatbots on your website to report analysis and summary to automating the kind of social media process for a company and many, many, many more. There are actually many repositories out there now that list all of the previous but also the new and upcoming AI tools and all of the various things that they're able to do. So it seems like the capabilities and the tasks that these new AI tools can undertake is actually growing, maybe exponentially. But I was particularly stunned by the recently released ChatGPT plugins and web browsing capabilities that I personally was given access to the night before my presentation. So as I hurriedly dove into these new tools, I found myself kind of reshaping parts of what I wanted to talk about, and soon found myself having a little bit of a light bulb moment, which sparked this week's episode. Now, I'm not saying that I know exactly how to build an autonomous business right this second, but I think it really did become apparent that if these tools are all that they're cracked up to be, then at least in large part this should be possible much, much sooner than expected. So rather than talking just theoretically, I want to bring about this example to make it sound a little bit more tangible. So specifically with the ChatGPT plugins, I was actually able to connect a voice-to-text extension that enabled me to speak into my microphone, and whatever I said was written out into a ChatGPT prompt. And once I stopped talking, the extension automatically prompted ChatGPT and it started responding to my query. So this in part is pretty cool. I remember when I did my master's thesis about 7 years ago or so now, I did it all through some older technology. I think it was Dragon Naturally Speaking, and I was just speaking to my computer and it was writing out my entire thesis. Of course, I would have to go back and change and edit it a little bit, but this was very similar to my time in my master's program. So just speaking to ChatGPT, it writes down what I'm saying, the prompt comes out, and ChatGPT starts to work. Now, what is particularly interesting is that ChatGPT, at least ChatGPT Plus, the one that you pay for every month, is connected to these plugins. And as an example, I was able to ask it to create a feedback form, which I could give to a client so their staff members could describe some of these internal pain points that some of the AI tools or digital tools that I've been testing out could solve. So some more examples here. Things like time-consuming report analysis and writing, to administrative tasks like tracking time and basic expenses and other things like that could actually be taken care of or solved if these forms are created. So I tested it out and the plugin began creating the form, and ChatGPT, based on my growing understanding of how it's starting to work, could be prompted to explain what parts are missing and essentially tell me what I should be asking it to create, or at least add on into these forms that I was creating. So something like what kind of other things could be added, or what other kind of columns could be added here. And it would say something like such and such topic could be added. So a column of whatever that was could be added to the form. And this little conversation would happen back and forth between me and ChatGPT. Again, without typing anything, it's just me speaking into my microphone, and the conversation would lead to another column being created in one of these feedback forms. So rather than spending time opening up a program, creating a form template, filling it out, researching which sort of things I should ask or may have missed in the initial creation, I could carry out the entire task in one application without typing, leaning back in my chair, petting my grumpy cat that I had ignored for too long. So this is also why there has been, I really think, a storm of activity and discussion about the power of OpenAI's product and how it, and many others like it, might become the next keystone technology that could rival the internet and mobile phones as kind of the main keystone technologies of our time. And for this and many reasons, the topic of AI, and specifically generative AI, will of course be discussed a little bit more in depth as time goes on. But the experience was obviously not perfect. So in the interface between the extension, ChatGPT, and the plugins, there was still some clunky and buggy interactions. So for example, my sentences were sometimes cut short, the form created was sometimes incomplete, and ChatGPT didn't always understand what I wanted or give the proper kind of feedback when I was asking it, hey, give me feedback on other things that should be added. But I can't complain too much for something that has only really been out for about a week. More importantly, what I think we are actually witnessing here is the birth of AI personal assistants. It'll take a while before they, of course, crawl, let alone walk or run. But as I experimented with this, I could see kind of faint images of Hollywood's Jarvis from Iron Man or Samantha. So coupled with the, I guess I could say, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of other digital tools that have been built over the past few decades, I think that there's a real opportunity here to, I guess you could say, empower or create a superpowered entrepreneur or business where it's kind of a one-man show or a 2 or 3-man show that's able to leverage these tools to do significantly more work than was possible in the past by themselves, right? So rather than having, an accountant, a secretary, maybe even a social media person, a lot of these, I guess you could say, more well understood tasks can now be done to a relatively high degree with some of these digital and AI tools. So I will update everybody now and then how I progress on this journey, but essentially what I am going to be trying to do is create an autonomous business with this new strategic foresight business that I'm setting up, or at least as autonomous as it is possible, right? So I still think that there will, of course, have to be some human input, especially with the main focus being a knowledge company which services specific clients out there. But at the very least, a vast majority, if not the entire back end of the company, can be automated, hopefully over the next, say, 6 to 8 months. But why does this actually matter so much, right? Apart from being really interesting and maybe cutting down on costs, if this can actually be built, I think it'll enable substantially more focus and effort on the interesting and fulfilling work, like, as I mentioned, the client interaction, the knowledge gain, the research that's required, the sharing of this information, and even, of course, business development. And, of course, the ultimate thrill of managing an AI bot army, happily fulfilling every task given to them. Now, I'm also fully aware of the limitations of this technology, right? This is one of the main reasons that I spoke on this a little bit earlier on in this episode. Totally aware that this might actually all completely fail and that the tools and the technology, specifically the AI technology out there, is just not advanced enough yet. So this might be a fool's errand, but I think that it's a worthwhile attempt, and at the very least, I will learn a lot about how these tools, and specifically how generative AI actually functions in the real world. So that's it for today's episode. If you are interested in this and maybe you're undertaking the same sort of project or you want to know more, do get in touch with me. I'll see how many people are interested in this. And I also have some other friends that are doing somewhat similar activities with their small businesses. If there's enough interest, I might actually start up a Slack group in order to exchange ideas with everybody so that we can use maybe some of the best tools or some of the most relevant tools that are out there to enable these autonomous enterprises to actually come to fruition. So yeah, as I mentioned, I'll maybe throw in 1 or 2 episodes every couple of months about how this is going. And if it does completely fail, I will also be sure to mention that. But from what I've seen, I'm pretty hopeful that this little project will actually come to fruition. Well, thanks for listening to this week's Future Tech and Foresight podcast. If you like what you've heard here, there are, of course, a number of ways that you can support the podcast. The best way would be to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or give a rating on Spotify, which you can find a step-by-step explanation for on the futuretechandforesight.com website. Alternatively, feel free to leave a comment either on the episode show notes or the YouTube channel where you can see video recordings of the interviews. And finally, if you are part of an organization that is aware of the disruptive and transformational impact that emerging and future technologies will bring and want to know more, please get in touch to hear about the strategic foresight services that we offer and how we can help future-proof your organization and take advantage of the phenomenal opportunities available to survive and thrive in the future.
A lot of future-shocked people and future-shocked institutions in our society are simply overwhelmed.
Once there is superintelligence, the fate of humanity may depend on what the superintelligence does.
Science fact is catching up to science fiction.
The first truly intelligent machine will be the last invention that humanity needs to make.
The only scarcity that will exist in the future is that which we decide to create ourselves as humans.
Within a 10-year design revolution, we can have all humanity living the highest standard living anybody's ever known.
Progress is accelerating at an exponential pace, and it's going to reach a point where progress is so fast it's going to be a singularity.
We are probably one of the last generations of Homo sapiens.
Every single headline points to the birth pangs of a Type 1 civilization.